I'm Austin Piszczek. I am the interviewer today.
I'm Gabriel Espinoza, and I'm the backup interviewer.
I'm Moini Cisse, and I'm a note taker.
And Josh Villa is our cameraman, and we are here today doing an oral history of Dinorah Marquez at the United Community Center, May 23rd, 2018.
Okay, so if you could just give us a brief family background and history.
That's big. That's a big question.
Before you were born.
Yeah, like
Before I was born?
Yeah, like your parents.
Where are they?
your parents are
Where's
from,
okay?
and- yeah.
Okay. All right. So on my father's side, the family came from Michoacán. El Oro, en Tlalpujahua, Michoacán. So they're primarily Purépecha Indian, and there's a big, like, there's this old family photograph where there's like 30 people in one shot, and there's like 10 musicians, you know, like with different instruments, including violins and different things. So I don't know what that's all about. So so that's that side of the family, and then on my mom's side of the family, the last name's Abadiano, and they apparently, his story says that they actually came at the same time as Cortés. And the last name Abadiano is actually a Sephardic Jewish name, but my family says no, that they're all, you know, Catholic. We even had a Bishop Abadiano at some point. So I'm pretty sure we're Sephardic Jewish though, but conversos, you know. And also that side of the family is intermixed with Aztec blood. So this is something like, I thought it was just, you know, family jokes, you know, but they're all like, oh, we're related to Moctezuma. And I'm like, yeah, everybody in Mexico is related to Moctezuma. You know, we all want to say we're from Moctezuma. Except that my family is not like that in the sense that, you know, it's not like, oh, source of pride, you know. And in my mom's side anyway, for me it is. So one day I just started like doing some research, you know, just combining the names. And as it turns out, there is a combination, Abadiano Moctezuma. I don't know if we're directly related to that combination, but there is. So I'd like to think my nose comes from that. So yeah, that's the whole thing. But on my mom's side, on my abuelita's side, they're all from Veracruz. And but everybody kind of, like many Mexicans, gathered in Mexico City. So I ended up being born in Mexico City. Mm.
So, being born in Mexico City, do you have any memory of living there? How was your childhood?
Well, actually, I left Mexico City very young, but I do have memories of walking down the streets. And when I was born, we lived right in the center of Mexico City, right in the downtown area, close to the to Bellas Artes and close to the Templo Mayor and the Zócalo and that whole area. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's like, it's the heart of what Tenochtitlan was and the heart of what Mexico is now. And I do remember, you know, going to the markets and stuff. I have this one crazy memory, and I must have been really little because I remember holding some adult's hand like this, right? And so I'm like walking down the street, and there's tons of people because the markets there are just crowded and it's crazy. And then all of a sudden I see a cat running, right? I'm like, oh, cat running. And then all of a sudden I see behind him, rat running. That was bigger than the cat. Like, oh, rat running, you know, that's Mexico City. That's like the flavor of it. But I left when I was 2 years old, to be honest with you. So we moved to the border, Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. And that's really where my childhood takes off, I think. And then when I was 10, we crossed over to the other side, to El Paso, Texas. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what that was like?
Living on the border?
Living on the border and then crossing.
Living on the border is a really strange reality, because you're always like, you know, if you're Mexican, you're always like, oh, el otro lado, you know? And everybody's like dreaming of going to el otro lado, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember I was in second grade and my second grade teacher left in the middle of the school year to go to el otro lado. It's like, oh man, I had a crush on him, so it was devastating. And yeah, there's always that sensation that you're like not living in the right place, because el otro lado, like the grass is really green. Not metaphorically. I mean, it's a desert, right? So like in the Juarez side, only the rich people had like nice lawns, right? And el otro lado, you walk around, all these houses have green grass, and all this good water is being used for grass, whereas in Juarez, well, you need water for other stuff. Plus, it's not really potable, so it's not like in Juarez, you're like, no vayan a tomar agua del grifo, you can't drink it from the tap. And then you cross to el otro lado, and it's like, oh yeah, just grab it, no problem. So, but there was the side of ours where all the gringos came to, and everybody wanted, every cool thing we had, Well, a lot of them just came to get drunk, but because you could do it younger there. But we had like better fruit, and a lot of really good foods were cheaper, gas. At one point, gas was a lot cheaper in Mexico, so people would come and gas up. And so there's this strange relationship between peoples of both sides on the border. There's a lot of racism, but as a little kid, you're not really familiar with it until you have the experience, until it really hits you in the face.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So. Crossing to the United States as a kid, we always crossed over to shop, right? Clothing was cheaper and things were easier to get that way. So we did that kind of shopping, and first for me it was little things. You don't really notice it, but they have these reactions. Wet bags, go back, and there's a lot of wet bag culture there, right? Because that's really the river. The Rio Grande is there, even though in El Paso it's almost dry all the time. But there's that idea, that if you're Mexican, that's how you get to the United States always. When we finally did move, it was really, really enhanced, right? So we moved, and we did move legally. My father was offered a job, and he was able to move his family legally. We didn't do that kind of crossing. But it really didn't matter, because the moment we moved into our house, the next day there was trash all over the porch and the front lawn, and signs, Spicks go home, and stuff like that. So we're like, wait, we didn't understand, we thought we had like arrived, and we were gonna have green grass, not, full of trash. And then we went to school, and at that time, if you were heard speaking Spanish in school, you could be expelled. It was no joke, right? The next year or 2 years later, they started bilingual education in the schools, but when I started, nada. And I didn't speak a word of English. And actually, I did. I thought I was saying 3, but I said 3. And then, so my dad's like, you dummy, it's 3. I'm like, 3. So that was it, So I went from being like a top student my first couple of years in grade school in Juarez to nada over here. I mean, the only thing like I could shine was math, because in Mexico they teach way better math than they do here, and much more advanced, much sooner. But then I couldn't speak, I couldn't write, I couldn't read. I was like doing spelling, and then for some reason they were telling a story about Dick Tracy, and I'm like going crazy in the dictionary looking for Dick Tracy. And I don't know if you guys know who Dick Tracy is. Well, Dick Tracy was a cartoon character, right? And I remember just sitting there like trying to do my homework, crying, because my mom, who's brilliant and has read so many books, couldn't help us. Like that was it. That was it. There was no more help, right? And she's like, ay, mija, pues no sé qué es esto, Dick Tracy, no sabemos. So, and it was just like, okay, that's it. Like everything's broken. Like the reality of your home is broken, the reality of your language is broken, the perception of who you are is broken. The perception of where you thought you were going is broken. So that was pretty rough. It was rough times. I write a lot of poetry about it because it's hard. The border is a hard place to live. Yeah.
And how was that? If you could go in a little bit more depth about that transition, especially learning English when you had moved to America.
Well, I've always been kind of like a, well, Josh knows me because I've been an overachiever. Like, so now in teaching, I'm like real demanding of my students because, like, right, I think nobody's going to hand it to you, and especially if you're Latino, you really got to do it, So I was quiet for several months, just taking things in, reading and writing as much as possible. I remember like checking out tons of books from the library and starting to read like from what first graders read, and read as much as I could. And by the time I was in the next grade level, nobody knew I had just arrived the year before because I just made it a point. And I'll tell you why as well. When we first moved, my brother and I were chased home after school every day to be beaten up, right? And it was, it wasn't just the white Americans, it was Chicanos, it was African Americans. When you're the new arrival, there's like, the lowest man in the totem pole, right? So you got, you have your recently arrived Mexicans, then you have your Chicanos, then you have your African Americans, then you got your whites, right? And so we were like down here, right? So it was really clear to me, like, I can't survive like this because I wasn't the kind of kid. I was scrappy, but I didn't like the idea of fighting, physically fighting with people. Plus some of them were like really big and tough, so I was like, no, I was scrawny and little. So yeah, I learned to run fast, and but I also quickly pushed myself. The idea, the concept that is placed upon us in the schools, and like you guys are at Marquez, and that especially as Latinos and minorities are, we have to get an education, right? That it sounds like I don't know how it sounds to your generation. But when you're in a situation like that, it's not something that is like, oh, wouldn't that be a nice dream? It was a lot more intense than that. It was like survive, right? You got to make it to that next day. You got to make it to the next grade. You got to make it to the next level. You got to make it, So then, and on top of that, our family life was really bad. There was a lot of domestic violence. So that was another reason to say, as a Latina woman, it wasn't an option not to do my best or be the best or push for the most or, that just, it was that or die. It was no gray area. So then when people tell me that, like, work with my students, they're like, God, you're so intense, they're kids. I'm like, so what? Life is not going to be easy for them, as we, and now in this historical moment that we live in, life is not easy for you guys, is it? No, I mean, like, what are you looking at, like, outside? What's happening 2, 3, 4 years down the line for you guys? Who are you going to be competing for those jobs? And how much more are you going to have to prove yourself to get that job, So that was very real to me. It wasn't hypothetical. It was like, that's what you fought for. So. Mm-hmm.
If you could talk a little bit more about growing up in El Paso and your transition in your education, that next step that you had just talked about, how you were fighting for that. What were those next steps, and how did you go about them in terms of going to school and moving out of El Paso eventually? If you could talk about that whole process and how it unfolded.
Well, to be honest, I've always been sort of very, one-track kind of person, and it was, I can't say that I did much more beyond my music and my studies. And then late into the night did other things that I like to do, like just my own hobbies and stuff. But like all of us, there were certain people, you know, in our lives that come in and say, hey, you know, you can do this, or here's a hand or something. So for me, my first violin teacher, Mr. James Angerstein, and the two other teachers in music who, you know, at each step of the way said, oh, wow, you are doing something here. Let me give you this so you can continue. So it was Mr. James Angerstein and then Mr. Edward Simon, and then Mr. Abraham Chavez Jr. And he turned out to be more like a father figure where one was lacking. And through working with him in the Youth Symphony Orchestra, I realized that there was a lot of possibility, that I could actually do a whole lot more. And I have a brother who's just 1 year and 4 months older than I am. And for him, music was also his safe haven. But unfortunately, you know, we all come with the strengths and the weaknesses that we each have, right? And we both face really, really difficult situations growing up, and had some of the same, very much the same mentors. But after like not the last, but there was a major catastrophe in our family that just broke him. And so even though he's still a violinist, he leads a very difficult life. I feel very blessed that I have a family and a job and students that I can share with stuff, and he's leading a very, very difficult life. And so I guess what takes me to that next step is just being really observant, you know, observant both ways. You know, I remember being very, very little, and like 7 years old, and you know, telling my mom, you know, Mom, I'm going to break the cycle of suffering in the women of our family. And she's like, oh yeah, how are you going to do that? I'm like, I'm not getting married. It just seemed like, wow, what a solution, right? I mean, why would we do that when every woman of every generation had suffered so much? And so that was just like, okay, I remember being very little and always saying, okay, that I don't want, that I do want. And just like, you know, really continuing. And so that practice continued throughout my childhood and into my teenage years. And so when there was a, you know, the moment came to start deciding whether I was going to go to college or not, or where, it wasn't a matter of whether I was, but where and how, because there was absolutely no money. When we left my father's house, my mother spoke no English, and she had pretty much just been enslaved in this situation for 20 some odd years. And so she, you know, heroically, I mean, she found a job. She was a seamstress in a sweatshop. And, you know, she pulled us through, you know. But then she had a terrible accident. I'm going to cry because she just passed away. So. So anyway, so my mom had a terrible car accident. Actually, this goes in the family lore. She was actually declared dead at the scene, and she came back. And unfortunately, that meant that the little bit of income that we had disappeared, right? So she was not able to work again, and the doctor said she wasn't going to live. Then they said she would never walk again, and then they'd say she'd never work again. And so this all happens while I'm in high school, right? And so high schools, at least I was at a high school where my graduating class was 600 people. So it was a huge high school, and you know, they had maybe one counselor. So counselors were useless. They couldn't really guide you as to, you know, I went to say, oh, I want to go to college, and she said, okay, here. And she gave me this book this thick. That was a listing of colleges right? It wasn't like now you can go on the internet and look them up and find out about them. It was like, okay, here's the listing of colleges, here's the address, write and ask for an application. And so here I'm at home, I'm dealing with, my mom did live, but she's struggling to survive, and we're, on food stamps, and my brother's gone bonkers because the accident really broke him. My mom's accident really broke him. And all I'm thinking is survive, right? So I send out applications to places, and I knew full well that what I was going to have to do is take wherever gave me a full ride is where I was going to go. So that's how I ended up in the Midwest originally. I ended up in Chicago at Northwestern University. So that's where I got to go. And I was deliberating on whether to do it or not, because my music teachers were offering me a partial scholarship at the local college to do music, but I knew that I couldn't afford to pay anything, and a partial wouldn't do it. And this other one was an academic scholarship. But I lost my train of thought there. So, say that again?
You say you were going to not.
Oh, yeah. So I was thinking, well, maybe I won't go. Things are rough at home, and so I was talking to my orchestra teacher, my high school orchestra teacher, not prominent in the top 10 of my positive people. So I was talking to him about it, and he said, and I quote, "You people never leave." Pues mira, I just got so mad. And I'm like, oh yeah? Okay. So I left. Needless to say, I left. So I left because of need as well, because that was what's going to cover my education. And it was really hard on my mom. It was really hard on the family. But, eventually she said, I can't take away from you something I can't give you. And so that's how I ended up in the Midwest at Northwestern.
You mentioned having a brother. Do you have any other siblings, or is that?
Yeah, well, this is my one full sibling, is my brother, who's a violinist. And then I have 3 half-siblings, 2 from my father's side and 1 from my mom's side. And only 2 are living now.
So at the time of domestic violence, did they live with you?
No, they were all gone. They were all much older. Like the next youngest was 12 years older than me. So they were all adults and gone, and they didn't live through that. Mm-hmm.
And how, you mentioned that about the domestic violence. How did you and your brother get through that emotionally? Was that more towards your mom, or is that reflected up on you a little bit too?
It was on all of us. You mean like who did it fall on?
Yeah.
It was on all of us. It was on all of us. Music got us through. There's somebody just put out a book that's called Classical Music Saved My Life, and they put a section on our program and on me on it, and it's true. That's really it. I can say categorically the only time that we were certain that the explosions weren't going to happen was when we were practicing. So home was safe only if my violin was in my hands and I was playing.
Did you ever feel like you were going to lose that safe place with your violin?
For some reason, that was something that my father respected. And so I never felt that. Well, you guys come from, I don't know if you have the same cultural experience, but Latino families, there tends to be a preference to the boys. And I don't know if your generations are still the same way, but mine definitely was, right? So we both played violin. I always scored higher on everything, but he was the violinist in the family. So I had to, I didn't want to compete with him. Obviously the focus was on him for many other reasons that I think were harder on him, to be honest, than they were on me. But it also gave me the sense of I have other identities. I'm not just a violinist or just something, you know. So I got the freedom to explore more things because of that. But yeah, the domestic violence was kept at bay with the music. That's what did it.
Could you talk a little bit more about the other things you explored? Because earlier you had mentioned that you had, like outside of your schooling and outside of your music, you had like a few other hobbies and things that had kept you busy. What were some of those things?
Well, I mean, the things that kept me the busiest, obviously, was my music and then my academics. I was kind of, crazy about that stuff. But I loved reading. I loved sewing. I loved writing. And I would just sort of stay up late into the night doing these kinds of things. You know, I love making things with my hands. I don't do that as much anymore. I miss it.
So, growing up in high school, like, did you see yourself becoming a violin teacher, or like, more focus on something else?
No, not at all. I knew I was going to be a veterinarian of exotic animals. That's what I wanted to be. Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I worked at the zoo. You know, that was my thing. That was my thing.
Was that like a summer job? Was that during the school year too?
It was during the school year as well.
Is that in high school or?
That was during high school.
So,
Can you talk about that a little bit? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because, we're just thinking about you and music and academics, but this is interesting.
Yeah. No, it all happened. I mean, I always wanted to study in the sciences. The sciences were my other passion. And it just so happened that I signed up for this workshop where, you could go with aspiring young veterinarians to the zoo and see everything from behind and see, and watch the doctor operate and all this stuff. So we go behind the scenes and I get to hang out close to the elephant. And so they're explaining to us that elephants, remember you if you, blow on their tusk on their, not their tusk, their, ¿cómo se llama?
Trunk?
Their trunk. And if you scratch their tongue, right? So the trunk comes out because, there were rejas. You guys are going to have to translate for me. I'm not thinking in English very well. So it comes out and I'm like, reach over there and I scratch her tongue. And then she's just like, smelling me, caressing me. And all of a sudden I had a purse. And she grabs my purse. And then she starts pulling it. And I'm like pulling it. And then for some reason, there was a newspaper person there. And they were like, I'm having a tug of war for my purse with this elephant. And then it came out in the paper. Anyway, I totally fell in love with this elephant. And I totally fell in love with that whole notion. And so I just applied to work there. And they let me do that. And it was very different. I mean, things are so much more controlled now. I mean, part of what I did was feed different animals. And for some reason, I was allowed to go into the venomous snake pits to feed the snakes, but I couldn't feed the turtle, the snapping turtle, because really, if you have to feed it in its mouth, and if it chomps on you, that's it, your finger's gone, right? But I could feed the mountain cat and get into the cage of the mountain cat, but not the turtle. And not the monkeys either. The monkeys, I didn't know monkeys are so dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know it then. I later found out. Anyway, it was my passion. But then I got really sick and I had to stop. Really, really, really sick. And I had to stop. But I still kept the idea and the passion until I went to university that was what I was going to do.
So, what didn't you like about your summer job? Was there
what I didn't like about it?
Yeah, was there something that you didn't like at the zoo, or that is different now that you wish was happening back then?
No, I'm not sure I understand the question.
I guess a better question maybe to ask would be, once you sort of learned that veterinarian wasn't necessarily what you were going to do, did you have an idea of what it was that you were going to do once you did move on to college?
Okay, so that transition was hard because I opted for going to a college that gave me an academic scholarship. And even though I was into academics and I was into the science and I thought I was going to be a veterinarian, my music was so fundamentally a part of who I was. And it was my identity, really. I mean, nobody knew me as a scientist. They knew me as a musician. And I knew myself as that as well. And so when I went to Northwestern, of course I kept practicing, I played, but I wasn't a music major. And honestly, music majors are kind of snooty. And they're like, oh yes, you can play in the symphony, but you're not a music major. And so it like started kind of toppling me, you know? Plus, you know, first time away from home, first time where you don't wake up at home speaking in Spanish, you know? First time in my life I got a C. And of course, if you don't have like the right mentorship at that age, you make dumb decisions. So I get a C, and I'm like, that's it. Nobody's ever going to accept me in veterinary school, right? Because I got a C, right? In advanced calculus, right? At Northwestern University. Of course, nobody's there telling you, no, dude, you're okay. You're a freshman. This is okay. You're going to raise it up. So I ended up changing my route entirely. I thought, I don't know what I thought. I'd gotten wrong information. I figured, no, my GPA is not going to be high enough, even though it was really high by the end of the time I finished. But so I changed, and I did keep constantly playing, and I kept playing in the symphony orchestra. I kept, doing classes related to music. But what I ended up majoring in is international relations and American studies. And I studied in Italy as part of the international relations major.
What was it like living in Italy? How long were you there?
I lived for a year in Italy.
Uh-huh.
It was great. I felt like it was a really kind of nice combination between being Latino and being in the United States, right? I felt like it kind of balanced the two sides of who I was. And Northwestern at the time had a terrible reputation as one of the places where most student suicides took place because the academic demands in that place are always so incredibly high. And so it was a hard place to be. Again, without like the emotional support. Now, like all these universities have great support for Latinos and retention programs, and like UWM's Roberto Hernandez Center. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. I mean, it's great. It's like this whole office with counselors that just really know who you are and where you come from and what you're all about. So you go in there and you're like freaking out because you're the only Latino in your class and everybody expects you to just speak for all Latinos. And your professor doesn't understand, and there's all these racial slurs, and you don't know what to do with it, right? Well, you go to this place, the Roberto Hernandez Center, and people help you like put it all together and help you, if there's an issue you need to raise in administration, they help you figure that out. Well, there was nothing like that. It was there again. It was like, and I grew up with swim or sink. It was and so I didn't see any reason for there to be anything different or any kind of support. You just made your own decisions and you dealt with whatever the consequences were. So.
Well, kind of jumping back and forth here, but you mentioned your love for animals. Did you have any pets growing up? Where did that love for animals come from?
Yeah, we always had pets when I was growing up. We always had dogs, mostly. Although, I mean, it wasn't dogs. It was just, really, I liked exotic animals. I don't know. I don't know. I just always did. I don't know where it came from. It's still there. I mean, like, I watch all the not silly, but cool documentaries. Have you guys seen the latest documentaries where they leave actual cams that are camouflaged, like something in their environment? Have you seen those?
Mm-hmm. Is it life?
I think I don't know I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, so you see these amazing animals reacting to things in ways that they'd never seen them before. because there's a camera that's like a rock, or one that looks like a turtle, or one that's like a dolphin and swimming with other dolphins, and so the animals come and play around with it, and so you see them in ways they had never seen them before. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm off on the wrong track there.
As far as violin goes, like, what sparked your interest into that, and like, what was like who gave you your first instrument growing up?
Well, the interest actually, I actually play violin by accident, to be honest with you, because my brother went into violin, and I, of course, didn't want to do anything my brother did. And so I decided I was going to play flute, right? And but the way our school was set up is if you were in band, you were assigned to a certain home room, right? A certain classroom. If you were in orchestra, it was if you were in choir, you were a different classroom. And so I was assigned to the classroom with Miss Love. And I really say it like this because, gosh, God rest, I don't know, she might still be alive, maybe she'd be well. But her name was not fitting. So, like I told you, I was like painfully shy. I didn't speak. I didn't talk to people. I didn't know how, right? I didn't know how to speak English. So Ms. Love decided that I was talking in class. And the way that she dealt with that is that she would stand you in front of the classroom and put your arms out and put a heavy red dictionary on each arm, right? And you had to stand there like that for the entire period, right? Well, that was pretty bad, but if you started lowering your arms because you were tired, she would come and she would pull your hair right here. She literally tortured kids, right? Now, granted, had I been talking because I was brought up tough, I would have said, well, I deserve it. But I wasn't. And so, in justice, I was done with that, right? So I knew I couldn't go home and say, oh, Ms. Love did this to me, because it would have been, well, what were you doing? And I knew I couldn't complain to the administration because everybody thought Ms. Love was great. And so I went to the counselor and I said, I think I don't really want to play flute. I would really like to play violin. Dun, dun, dun. And so I got changed, and so now I became a violinist. I love it. I'm glad I didn't play flute, but it was by accident. Yeah.
Were you like religious at all growing up?
I was baptized into the Catholic religion. But as I was growing up, my mother had a real break from the church for very painful reasons. I'm not going to go into that. But in her break with the church, she didn't have a break with the prophet, with Jesus. She didn't have a break with that, but she had a break with the institution. But she also believed what remained for me as my fundamental beliefs, which was that Jesus was the Son of God, the same as all of us are the sons and daughters of God, and that he was a prophet the same way that the great prophets of all the religions are prophets, and that every prophet came to us at different times to show us the way to illumination, not salvation, to illumination. And so I've always, been interested in other religions. I've studied about other religions. I've practiced within the metaphysical practices of a couple of different religions. So I wouldn't say that I'm religious at all. I would say that I believe in spiritual practice, and I would definitely say that I respect people of faith, of sincere faith, not dogmaticism. Dogmatics, I think, are part of the problem in our world, but people of faith. Like, my mom returned to her Catholic faith as she became older, never blinding herself to the problems of the institution, but her faith was strong. and my abuelita had a very strong faith. And other people that I see with strong, sincere, heartfelt faith, I really respect that. I think that's powerful.
What were some of those other religions that that you got?
Well, for many years I practiced in the metaphysical practices of Hinduism. I was initiated by a master, a yogic master, in something called Kriya Yoga. And I practiced that for a long time. And then after my daughter was born, I kept doing the meditations and stuff. But after a few years, I've always been intrigued since I was a child because I read about a lot about Buddhism. And so I would say that started ringing more true with who I was and how I wanted to walk this world. So the teachings of certain Buddhist masters is what I'm most interested in.
Do you still practice those today?
Yes. Mm-hmm. In fact, that helped me in my citizenship application.
Wow.
Yeah, awesome.
How so?
I became a citizen about a couple of years ago. And one of the questions they ask you is if you would be willing to bear arms to defend the Constitution of the United States. And I am a pacifist, and I've been so since I was 15 years old. And so I wrote no. And then the next question is, would you be willing to perform civil service, should the country need it? And I said yes, right? So when you go and get interviewed, they review all your answers. And I had no idea how important that one was. I was lucky that the person who was interviewing me liked me from the beginning. And when she read that response, she said, "Oh my goodness, you wrote no, you wouldn't be willing to bear arms." I'm like, yes. She was really worried. She was really upset. And I was like, well, why? And I told them what I just said to you. I told her, and she said, oh, but we need documentation. I'm like, okay. So, well, would you be willing to write a statement? And I said, sure. So I started writing, and I knew right away that to them it would have to mean something related to a religion, not just a personal ideology. So I was able, I started writing, and I was able to say that, especially involved in the nonviolent aspects of Buddhism, and that this is how I led my life, and that I've done so since I was 15 years old, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So she ran out to try and figure out what I should write in the paper, and then she came back in and she said, "Any chance you could write something about Buddhism in there?" I'm like, well, yeah, that's what it is. So when I finished the interview, usually when you finish your interview, if you've passed all your questions, and if the interviewer likes your answers, they say to you, welcome, congratulations, you're a citizen of the United States. And she said, I can't say that to you because they may ask you for more documentation about this particular issue. So, if you're not a U.S. citizen, it probably doesn't seem, if you are a U.S. citizen, it probably seems like, oh, that's weird, but not a big deal. It's a huge deal because a month later, my mom had to go do the same interview. And so I came home and I told her she had written no, she wouldn't bear arms. And I said, Mommy, you're going to have to say you would, or you're going to have to explain yourself, but you can't use Catholicism. And she said, why not? Es mi religión. Y dice, no matarás. My religion says you shall not kill. I said, I know, but this religion has killed a lot. and they're not going to buy it, And she's like, no, that's not how it is. So I took her, and they let me be her interpreter. And I was very honest interpreter. I said exactly what she said. So we get to that question. The guy who she got was not nice. He was really tough. And so he was calming down by the time we got to that question. When he sees the answer, he freaks out. His face turned red. He's like, why would you not be willing to do this? And he starts talking like that to my mom. And I was not happy. And then I turned around and I looked at her and I just said, in Spanish, why would you not be willing to bear arms? And she looked at his red face, and she looked at me, and she goes, porque estoy viejita. She goes, because I'm a little old lady. I mean, my mom was 86 when she did this, right? And the guy's getting upset with her. And so so the guy's like, well, yeah, but I mean, hypothetically, would you do it? And I'm like, really, guy? You're going to go that far? So I translated, and she looked at me, and she's like, yes. So it's like it's really an important part of that interview. In case you have family who's going to do that interview someday.
Becoming a citizen, how was that for you? Like, prior to that, were you a resident, or because I remember earlier in the interview you had said that that your father had gotten a position in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
which allowed for your family to
Mhm.
come. How did that work out? Did something happen with your status once your parents had separated, or?
Well, actually, my father became a citizen when I was still a minor. But it happened when my mom's father was dying, and we went to Mexico to see him. And it really shouldn't have had any effect. I didn't know this until I went through the whole citizenship procedure. But typical of my dad, because he was mad that we left for my dying grandfather, he didn't then request our citizenship. So we remained residents, right? And for a very long time, for my personal ideology, convictions, whatever, I didn't want to lose my Mexican citizenship, so I didn't want to become a citizen. And so we waited a long time, and we finally did it because of the change in tides historically, and because what we saw coming. We have friends who are working profoundly with immigration issues, and they just said, it looks like what's coming is going to be really bad if you don't do it before Obama's out. You may not, who knows what's going to be happening then. So we just decided to do it then. And Mexico does not require you to lose your Mexican citizenship now. The United States requires you to resign to other citizenships, but Mexico doesn't make you lose it. So technically, you can have a dual citizenship. Mm-hmm.
So when you finally became a citizen, what was that feeling like? Did you finally feel like you finally, proved some people wrong, like your middle school teacher who said you'll never leave this place and nothing? Or?
I don't think it had that kind of significance for me. I think everything else, starting this program had more of that significance to me. Doing the other things that I've done, when I graduated from college, I had a really cool position with the mayor of the city of Chicago.
Could you talk about that?
When I graduated from Northwestern, Harold Washington was the first black mayor of Chicago, and he had just been elected. And so I applied to work with him in a department that was called the Department of Neighborhoods, which is, he used to go out with all the heads of departments to any neighborhood, and people would come and just ask why things were not being fixed in their neighborhoods. And so he would make the heads of the departments deal with the issues of the community. So I first started with that, but then they moved me up to the press office. So I was his assistant press secretary, and I wrote his speeches, and everything that dealt with Latinos and women are the issues that I dealt with. And I was, 21 years old. I was really young, and it was really, I think that was, historically, that's probably, you asked me, if there was a historical moment that I was involved with, that was probably the most important. It was kind of like, it was the equivalent of Obama becoming president, but as a city in Chicago, this man becoming mayor of the city. And so I felt like I was able to accomplish more, doing that, and I was a resident, I wasn't a citizen. I think for me, the citizenship issue is more of a bureaucratic necessity, which doesn't have anything to do with how I feel about the country or the people or the place. You know, to me, the two things
Very different.
are very different. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so it'd be nice if you could go back to your position with the mayor of Chicago and where that kind of led you to later, or like what positions that, or what doors that had opened for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you'd think I would go for that, right? But I didn't. It was a really interesting position, and it was, it was a very exciting time. But it was also a time in my life when my spiritual life was much more important than my political life. And so like everything I do, I just, I worked tons of hours and really focused on what I was doing, and I believed in what I was doing. And then several things happened, in the administration. And then the thing that really kind of topped it off for me was the mayor's right hand was a gentleman who passed away, and he passed away suddenly, right? Apparently nobody knew what had happened. A lot of rumors, but anyway, he passed away suddenly, and we find out he's just passed away. And of course somebody sets up the press conference in my opinion, to announce this man has passed away and condolences to the family and stuff. So we all head over to the press conference, and to my surprise, what they're announcing is his successor. I mean, the man is still in the hospital, just dead. And it was a huge sort of lesson to me. We get involved with the things that we do, and we can even come to the point where we think we're important, right? And I'm not saying that people are not important, but there's a difference between important for life and important for family and important than bureaucratically important, right? So, something my mom had always said to me, nobody is indispensable. I say that now that I've been here for this amount of time. To feel safe. I think that's the most important. To feel safe in so many ways. I would like for history to change a little bit, and the whole issue of immigration is so big. For kids not to come to school scared, not because school's scary, but because they don't know what's going to happen at home. I've had so many experiences with students where, they're like outgoing and fearless when they're 5 years old and 6 years old and 7 years old, and then all of a sudden they're scared to death to lose their parents' from their sight. They're like crying after school. It's like, my mom doesn't know where to pick me up, or what. And I'm like, where is this coming from, right? It's coming from that insecurity of not knowing whether your parents are going to pick you up after school or they're going to disappear into the system, right? So that to me is like fundamentally the most important. Not to have a parent come up to me and say, Ms. Dinorah, we've made our family plan. Should something happen, should we be deported, should we be taken, would you be willing to take care of our children? I mean, yes, of course I would, but why do you even have to worry about that? Why should that be your reality? So I think that is probably the most important thing. I think right now for our community. The other on the more positive side of things, it's you guys, this generation, and what you guys are going to go out to do, and how you're going to lift this community by what you're doing, right? That to me is amazing, just knowing that's happening, just hearing your dreams, hearing where you want to go, right? I'm looking forward to that. That's what I'd like to see happen. Much more positions of leadership all around being taken by your generation in every place, right? I love going to play for some board or some group of bankers and saying, I love saying this. Did you enjoy the music? And they'll say yes. Look at these faces carefully, because these are the people who are going to have your jobs in 10 years. So that's my dream. What happens with me personally, I'm not so concerned about. Like I said, nobody's indispensable. And the process is what's important. What I'd like for the program, I'd like for the program to continue to be to serve the community. I'm excited that I'm now starting to train some young people who are from the program, from the first generations, who are studying music and music education and administration and both business and arts administration. Because I think I've always said since I started that I want to retire by handing the program over to one of my graduates. So I'm hoping that that dream will come true. On the practical side, I'm hoping that somebody with a lot of money will look at the program and say, this program should be endowed. We should do something to make sure that it can stay, regardless of how the tides move. That's a big dream. That, like I hope somebody that sees this and they've got money and they're like, maybe I don't have all that money, but maybe I can get 10 more friends together, and together we have enough money to do that. That would be awesome. Mm-hmm.
We're kind of wrapping up here a little bit, but with a few questions. I understand that in terms of historical events, your siblings were in the 1968 Sudak massacre.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, did they ever talk to you about their experiences or like their fears during the time? Or?
To be honest, no. I mean, the day that it happened, I don't know. Do you guys know about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit.
The Noche de Tlatelolco. So it was a really terrible time politically in Mexico, and the student movement was really strong in criticizing the president at the time. And there's a lot of details. So both my brother and my sister were part of the university that was most active in the protests and in the marches, and they were involved with all of it. And for some unknown reason, I don't know what happened, the night that the massacre took place, something happened. Something came up. They didn't go. They didn't go to the event. But I grew up with the stories about it, and the stories about their friends, and the stories of what can happen when a president goes really awry and turns the military against its youth. We don't know. Nobody knows the exact number of dead, but it's in the thousands.
Last question. Who would you say has had the most influence in your life, and what did that person do for you?
This is going to sound hokey, but it's my mom. It's my mom. I don't know many other people who have suffered as much as my mother did in her life, from when she was little until she passed. And yet, I don't know many other people who love life as much as my mom did, and who are capable of creating beauty in terrible circumstances. I don't know a lot of people like that, and I'm still learning. You know, I'm still learning. I wish my life was hard, but never as hard as hers. My losses have been great, but never as huge as hers. And yet, you know, I find time to complain. And I won't stop that, you know. I want to be able to honor her by continuing her legacy of creating beauty, regardless.
We want to thank Ms. Dinorah for joining us today and spending a little bit of your day with us, talking about your life. So.
Thank you, guys.